We now go across the ocean, and we hear something from the United States. Rabbi Dr. Tzvi Weinreb, Executive Vice President Emeritus of the Orthodox Union, will be happy to hear a view from across the ocean.
I'm actually going to speak from across more than one ocean, because there's an ocean of difference between my expertise and the expertise of the other distinguished panelists. I am not a scientist, and I offer apologies to my fellow psychologists for saying that we're not scientists. And what I would like to do is offer at least some considerations that are very, very different from the kinds of things that we've heard about until now, if only as a corrective to the direction of this entire discussion, not just for this conference, but for the entire field. Number one, what I've been impressed by in all of the talks by all of the presenters so far is the total neglect of environment and the interaction of genetics and environment. There seems to be almost a bias here that everything is in the genes and environment plays no role. And yet I think that it's unanimous that environment plays some role, at least some role. I would argue that it plays a major role even in the development of some of the consequences of genetic selection. But certainly it plays a mediating role and a moderating role. So I just want to put on the table the question of environment, and specifically with the ethical question that was raised about late onset diseases. There clearly is some interaction effect between environment and the point of onset, the severity of onset, the way the diseases will be or can be treated, even not medically treated, just socially treated, the social supports the person will have, et cetera, et cetera. These also, and many of these are imponderables, but they have to be factored into the decision-making process. Number two, moving away to a very, very different discipline, I'd like to introduce another notion entirely, and that is the notion of the soul, the notion of the neshama. I just finished reading a fascinating novel by a man named David Mitchell. It's called Cloud Atlas. It's a complicated novel. I recommend it to you because a big part of it addresses just these issues and speaks about the kind of brave new world concept about a world in which people are planned from a genetic point of view, and some of the outcomes of it. And of course, the hero of the book is the neshama, the soul of man, which prevails sometimes even in the face of all sorts of genetic design. We heard from the first speaker, about the importance of recognizing the tremendous complexity of genetics. I would add, it's not just that this complexity, what it does for me personally, is it introduces a note of humility. And ultimately, the humility that I feel is because of the kinds of situations that I've seen, and I think we've all seen, of the indomitable spirit, the neshama that can prevail against all sorts of odds. I think it's part of our belief system. Maybe it's not the Jewish point of view, but it's certainly a Jewish point of view, that somehow the neshama can overcome even physical handicaps, physical challenges. Number two. Number three, I'd like to introduce into this consideration of PGD for prevention of the birth of a person who will have a late onset disease. When we consider these kinds of issues, we consider the needs, priorities of the society, cost, etc. Those are on the table. We consider the needs of the parents. Rabbi Steinberg put those on the table. The parents' needs, in one case even grandparents' needs. But what about the needs of the unborn child? Who speaks for the unborn child? Could we ask someone who is 40 years old and knows that he's going to come down with one of these horrible diseases in 10 years, could we ask him if he would rather not have been created, if he would rather not have been born? I mean, there's one case I saw in the literature of a person who sued, the opposite. I should not have been born. And yet you allowed me, you, my parents, you, the medical establishment, allowed me to be born by not doing sufficient genetic screening, so therefore I'm suing for being alive. And this sounds kind of ridiculous, but this is an actual legal case in the United States. But I'm looking at the opposite. Who will sue for the discarded fertilized egg who could have been a very creative person who had a wonderful life up until age, whatever, 45, 50, who has a guarantee if you're younger than 45 or 50, that you will even reach 45, 50. None of us have guarantees. And yet we have a life with value, contributions to society, et cetera, et cetera. Who speaks for the unborn, unconceived, in this case, child? And in general, related to that, we have to consider the value of the life pre-onset. Which can be 40 or 50 or 60 years of very significant contributions to life, a very meaningful life, enjoyable life, etc. How can we just ignore that? None of us has a guarantee that we will live beyond a day. And these are considerations that I'd at least like to put on the table, along with everything else that we've so brilliantly heard enunciated today.
Thank you for bringing up a whole series of new points of view on this area. It's interesting to note, when PGD began here in Israel, there was a great deal of discussion among some of the ethicists, and some of them wanted to make a list of diseases for which you could do PGD, which you can't do PGD. This is in a society where abortions are readily available. And the same people who had no objection to people doing abortions had the problem with PGD for a particular thing, and it was a fascinating, it's a phenomenon called genetic exceptionalism, really, when obviously PGD is a much less objectionable process than abortion. And yet Israel, by the way, has probably the highest percentage of abortions for trivial complaints. The average Israeli family wants a perfect child, and that's a very interesting sociological comment on what we have here.